Hey there, in this video we'll be discussing about the differences between the var and let keywords in JavaScript. Now both of these keywords are used to declare variables, but their behavior is slightly different. Now the var keyword has been around since the inception of the JavaScript language itself, but let was introduced sometime recently in 2015 when the ECMAScript 6 or ES6 standard was introduced. And this was done very intentionally to replace var, mostly because the way in which var behaved sometimes was leading into unexpected errors. So why do we even want to discuss the differences between the two? One, you can find some very old code bases which still are using var, and two, there can be certain cases where var is intentionally being used because of the functional scope that it offers. We'll discuss about the differences between the scopes of let and var. And third, like this is one of the most common interview questions asked if you're applying for a JavaScript developer. So let's get straight into the differences. Let's begin with the first difference, which is when you declare a variable using var, it also creates a property by the same name inside the global object. But let doesn't do that. And I'll show you what I mean by it. So here I am on a blank page on the Chrome browser. Now all browsers support JavaScript and you can write JavaScript snippets in the console section. So first I'll show you what I mean by the global object. For any web page, even a blank page, the global object is the window object. So if I type the keyword this, which will point to the current scope, it will send back the window object. Now I'll define two variables. One I'll define by using the keyword var. So I'll say var first name and I'll give some value. And then I'll declare another variable using let and I'll call it maybe last name. I'm going to hit enter now. And now I'll try to access first name and last name from the window object. So I'll say something like window dot first name. And as you can see, the variable that I declared by using the keyword var attach itself to the window object. And I can access it by using window.firstname. But the same will not be true for the last name variable which I created by using let. So I'll say window.lastname, and as you can see it's undefined. Since window is the current global scope, I can also access it by using this.firstname. So with this little experiment, we just proved that whenever you create a variable using var, it will attach itself as a key value pair to the global object. Now, how can this behavior of var cause errors? So let's say in the current window scope, there is a function called alert. Let's try to create a variable using var, which is named alert itself. And when I try to print the window.alert, it's returning the string warning back to me. But what happened to the alert function that was there in the window object before? And as you can see here, it's complaining that alert is no longer a function. So if you declare a variable by the same name which exists in the global scope, it's going to cause an issue. Let doesn't do that, so prefer using let over var. Now let's jump to the second and the most important difference between the two keywords, which is the scope in which they operate. Now var has functional scope and let has block scope. Let me tell you what I mean by that. So anything which is defined between two enclosing curly braces is a block. And anything that's defined within the curly braces of a function definition, it defines the scope of the function. So as you can see here, the functional scope can have many blocks within it. And in this example that you're seeing on the screen right now, there is one block, and since we wrote a condition which will always be true, this block will run, and within this block we're defining two variables, one by using the keyword var. So we're defining var name1 equals to John, and then another variable we're defining using let. So we're saying let name2 equals to Jane. Then we'll be console logging both of these names inside the block, and then we'll try to log both the names again outside the block, but still within the function. Then I'll call the function fun, and just notice what the output is. So the first two logs that you are seeing are coming from within the block. So within the block, we just declared two new variables, and we are saying that the name1 inside block value is John and name2 inside block value is Jane. But once we move outside the block, just notice that name1 is defined, but for the name2, it's throwing an uncaught reference error saying that name2 is not defined. Now this happened because let has a block scope. So this particular variable name2 went out of scope after the block ended. So after this particular line, if you're trying to access it again, you will not be able to access it because its scope was limited to its own block, which was this particular if conditional block. But since name1 was defined using var keyword, it will have functional scope, and even if it is defined inside another block, it will stay in scope throughout the entire function. So even though it was defined in this line and the block ended here, it will still be visible for the rest of the function because it has functional scope. Now again, functional scope is something that's not very intuitive and might get confusing at times. So again, that's why let was introduced with a block scope, and it's much easier to work with. Now again, no one is stopping you from using var. There might be a use case, but just be very careful around how you are using it. Let's move on to the third difference, which is how they are hoisted. Now, hoisting is just a concept with which you can access a variable before it's declared in its current scope and still be able to work with the code without throwing an error. I'll explain what that means. Now in this function, we're creating two variables, one with the var keyword and the other one with the let keyword, and we're initializing them with a string as a value. Now before these two are initialized, we are trying to console log them, and hoisting enables us to still be able to do that without running into an error. But the thing is, variables declared with var are hoisted, but with let are not. So the console log will work just fine for declared with var variable, but this particular line where we're trying to log declared with let variable will throw a reference error. So if I call this function, it will print undefined. Now this undefined is coming from this particular console log, and because variables with var are hoisted, we are able to access it, but since it's not initialized yet, its value is still undefined. But as we try to log the variable with let, we are getting a reference error saying that cannot access declared with let variable before its initialization. Hence, if I move this console log after the variable is initialized, this function will run just fine. So I'll give the new function definition, call the function, and it's not throwing an error now. The variables defined with let are said to be in a temporal dead zone, which is just a fancy term. You don't have to worry about it, but all it means is that before a variable with let is initialized, it's in this dead zone where it cannot be accessed. And hence, if you try to access it, it will throw a reference error, which we just saw in the previous implementation of the hoist check function. These were the three main differences that you needed to know between let and var, and these differences are something that you should always keep in mind whenever you're writing JavaScript code. Let me know in the comments if you guys still have any doubts around these concepts. So this was it for the video. Like the video if it helped you guys, and subscribe if you want to watch more of such content in the future. I upload new videos weekly. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.